Thank you, Keith, and thank you, Sky, and thank you to the editors for this beautiful issue. I'm really excited to be reading, especially to be reading this poem, because last year I had a book come out, and I'll read a couple of poems from that. So it's one of the 2020 books that had to pivot to the online virtual reading realm. But this was the poem, or this poem was one of the first things that I wrote after Grimoire. And this has been a really difficult year to write for me in general. So it actually feels really special to have this poem in this collection. And I wanted to say that in many ways, the poem is really about distance. We've all had to experience social distancing in many ways. And it's about missing family and about time and how COVID and everything has just changed how we experience time and distance. So it's called Keeping an Eye Out for Cougars. Narrow was what they called my cousin, who is now as exquisite as the Kenyan model pouting on the cover of French Vogue. But before we were of age, I was the pretty one, light with good hair and regular. In every photo from the 70s, she was my shadow. I'd forgotten or never wondered why we slept over at my house, but never hers. The winnowing. Childbirth striated my abdomen while hers remained cast iron flat. In the parking lot beside the trailhead, we share a lopsided hug. She gestures at the notice of a mountain lion encircled and struck through with red. Hiking together, I can't match her stride. The distance between us never narrows. She stays a quarter mile ahead the entire climb, is leisurely surveying a smog-soaked vista pierced by sky-high hotels, bars, and the alphabet of what I know is the Hollywood sign when I stutter to the summit heaving. I accuse her of setting a deliberate pace. Bewildered, she says, "Was this a race?" I give in, shamefully gratified. She might be younger, but she's alone. So again, meditation on distance. I'm from Los Angeles, and so it's been over a year since I've seen my family, in real time. So Grimoire is the book that came out last year. Little picture here. These are poems that respond to the first cookbook published by an African-American woman in the 19th century. She was a free woman. Her name was Melinda Russell. So a lot of the work is found poetry. So you'll hear I think I'll just probably read a couple. In one of them, you'll hear lines not just from Melinda's cookbook, but also from Paul Laurence Dunbar. Wild Yeast. What color is Shakespeare? To answer, I read my son Dunbar. First, we recite, we wear the mask. Then, when Melindy sings. We pause at the line from the kitchen to the big woods. When cooking with Melinda, her haintly breath is citrus and clove. Her hands, rough as wind within, smooth as pears without, guide me as I knead and read her receipts aloud. Each line works its alchemy, solidifies her shade, elevates the timbre of her voice. She does not speak the broken tongue of Paul's folksy muse. Penwomanship alone affirms her education. Not until the poet delivers Dinah's arms, buried elbow deep in dough, do I forgive his lyric blasphemy. So there are a lot of recipe poems, but there are also a lot of poems here that respond to mothering and the feeling of precarity that Black mothers have. I had a different lineup that I was thinking of reading, but after Keith read those powerful poems, there's another one that I want to read. It's called Open Curtains. And, this week teaching, I found it difficult to come up with yet another statement, right, for my students. And I was just exhausted, and I have a teenage boy, and every time he leaves the house in the car, I feel like I get more gray hair. I lose another year of my life. Um, this poem is called Open Curtains. If it is barely spring, orange tulips frame my neighbor's bungalow, a roguish backdrop for the boys' white sneakers, black and yellow hoodies. They are up to nothing or something. I am listening to their buzzing, but not hearing. I am thinking of my boy on a parallel street in a like formation, not regarded by me. I read the same page over and over until when I look up, they are gone. The bruised shadows of tulips loiter in their wake. I think I'll end there. Thank you all for being here in community.
Thank you so much. The bruised shadow of tulips. I was like in the middle of writing that down. Yeah, thank you. Next up, I will be introducing pull up the bio. Darise JeanBaptiste is inspired by the Black women who raised her in the Bronx and St. Lucia. Currently living in Brooklyn and working in the social impact sector, she earned her MFA from Rutgers, New York, and her MA in English Literature from Brooklyn College. Darise is a Vona and Callaloo creative writing workshop alum.
Thank you so much for having me. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Green Mountains Review and to the Vermont Studio Center for hosting this event. And a special thank you to Naomi Jackson for her editorial guidance. And a big shout out to my family who's on this call tonight in the Bronx where you are. So happy to have you guys here. So I'm going to be reading from my story called Thirst. And when I was writing this story, I thought a lot about power, how we claim it and how we reclaim it. And in writing this character, Shantae, I tried a lot to grapple with the question of power, whether or not we actually have it. Since applying for her license to carry a weapon, Shantae wrestled with the question of safety. Was it safe to have a gun and a child in the same house? You'll probably kill me or grandma, Ephraim said when she announced that she was getting a gun. Shantae cringed at the thought of mishandling her weapon. And as much as it hurt to admit it, Ephraim had a point. Living with a gun increased their chances of death by gunshot. It wasn't like she was going to keep the gun in a shed. They lived in a 3-bedroom house, and she had already gotten used to storing it in the nightstand beside her bed. If you shoot anyone, you could get locked up, Ephraim said. Do you want to go to prison, Mom? Shantae felt him watching her as she searched her hands for an answer. She couldn't let him remember her that way, flustered and lost. Do you trust me? Shantae held her breath. She crossed her fingers and toes, hoping he'd say what she so desperately wanted to hear. Ephraim pouted and said, yeah. When she relayed the story to her mother, Marguerite scoffed, running her palm over the big onyx stone she wore on her middle finger. One day your child will hate you and the next day worship the ground you walk on. What the hell are you talking about? That's how kids are, she laughed. Just get him something nice for his birthday and he'll forget that his mom packs a 9mm. She wished her mom was right. If only she could buy him a toy to eliminate his criticism of her choices, or better yet, squeeze him tightly and promise that she'd be careful. If only she could call a truce. So jumping ahead a little bit, Shantae goes on a retreat, trying to get herself together, as we do in this age of self-care. That first night in Costa Rica, she was excited to break bread with the retreat leader, a yogi named Darwin she discovered on YouTube. She had been drawn to his sensitive way of speaking and his affirmations about the body doing what the elevated mind tells it. She visited his Instagram page nearly 5 times a day and purchased spandex pants from his website that had the words mind over matter emblazoned on the side. Almost a year after first meeting Darwin on the internet, There she was at an eco lodge, waiting for him to appear and greet her and the other 11 women who signed up to fully recharge. In the morning, she felt refreshed and ready to practice the unique flow of poses that she expected Darwin to assemble for their class. When she arrived at the gazebo, she saw a few of the women lying on their backs on their mats. One woman read a book and another let her feet dangle from the side of the wooden platform. She checked her watch to be sure of the time. It was 8 o'clock exactly, but there was no sign of Darwin. "You'd think he'd get here on time," a woman with curly brown hair said. "We are paying over $1,000 for this experience." Shantae unrolled her mat. She sat with her legs crossed and let her hands graze her knees. She decided to meditate before class began. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine a candle burning in the center of her hollow chest. With every breath, the light expanded until it almost touched her rib cage. The deeper the breaths, the bigger the fire. So she slowed, then held the air inside until the back of her throat burned. When she finally let out the air, it felt like a small bomb bursting inside her chest. "Hey," the curly brunette tapped Shantae on her shoulder. "Class is canceled. Darwin has a sinus infection. We're going to the beach to surf. You should come." "Now I'm going to stay here and practice handstands." As the woman walked away, Shantae got up from her seat and pulled her mat toward the center of the platform. She warmed up using one of the sequences she had seen on Darwin's channel. The morning temperature had already risen enough that sweat covered her arms and legs. She resisted wiping herself down, pushing away the thoughts of discomfort that were taking her away from enjoying the fresh air and solitude she wanted to experience during her vacation. Just as Darwin had instructed in his 20-minute handstand tutorial, Shantae focused her gaze on a spot on the mat and set her hands shoulder-width apart. With her butt lifted to the air, she bent one knee, bouncing off one foot to lift the other off the ground. She did it again with her hands still planted, and this time got both legs off the ground. Her body formed an imperfect L shape. On the last try, she managed to get her toes pointing to the sky, and it felt wonderful. There she was, upside down, not perfectly straight, but close, and she sensed power pulsing through her head and arms. As she inhaled, she wished that she could be seen. How cool would it be if someone witnessed her pressing all her weight into her hands? She didn't want the pose to end. She felt powerful and totally in control of her body and her mind. Though she tried her best to keep her thoughts in the present moment, she couldn't hold back the memory of the night her bar had been robbed. Other than the police, she didn't tell anyone, not even her therapist, that she witnessed the whole thing from her car. Everyone assumed that she'd been in the bar when it happened. No one knew that how she gripped the steering wheel on that windy night and crouched by her seat while her heart felt like barbed wire was wrapped around it. She didn't tell anyone that the streetlights made it easy to see the burglar through her car window, to see a man dressed in tan slacks and work boots trying to pick the door lock. She was down the street near an empty dirt lot, waiting to be developed into another motel. It was all happening so fast that she thought of honking to scare the burglar. But that came and went like a shot of rum. Her hand shook as she fumbled with her phone. When the emergency operator asked for her location, she gasped because the burglar took a wooden bat to the door, then threw his hands in the air as if he couldn't believe there'd be a security siren. Glass poured like ice water onto her dirty boots, and she scrunched her toes as if she could feel the shards hit her. The operator told her to stay out of sight and on the phone until the police arrived. She would have followed those orders, but when the perpetrator ran out with the cash register cradled in his hands, she opened her window and threw her phone at his head. Shaken by all she'd seen, she still marveled at the way the burglar never turned his head to see which direction the hard object that hit him had come from. Still suspended in the yoga pose, Shantae imagined a different outcome, one where she chased him down to retrieve the cash register. She'd flash her gun and he'd surrender, no question. She imagined the burglar throwing her to the ground as she tried to walk back to her bar, considered what it would have felt like if he stomped on her shoulders, back, and face. The image of her swollen, bloody jaw made her blink hard. Sweat fell off her face and onto the spot on the mat where she directed her concentration. When she looked away from that spot, her arms started to tremble, and her legs suddenly felt as heavy as bags of flour. She panicked, biting her lip and breathing the fire that got big in her chest. Hold, hold, she told herself, until she toppled and fell on her hip. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
So I don't know if someone else is going to moderate the questions, if people have questions. But yeah, that was incredible. Thank you for that reading, for all of you for sharing your work. Yeah, a round of applause, a silent round of applause for everyone tonight. Thank you all. Okay, great.
I'm gonna moderate the questions from the chat if everyone's okay with if anyone has any questions. And I'm also happy to hear like another poem from you, Keith, if you feel like reading another piece. And I'm also happy to like answer any questions that people might have. And Darise, I want to know what happens in your story.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna have to pick up the issue.
Yes, please pick up the issue. It's great. There's so many good things in here, including the cover, which is beautiful. Thank you so much, Raven Leilani.
Yeah. Do you want to discuss the cover, the selection of the cover art?
You're talking to me?
Oh, I just or I whoever like is in the room that had a hand in selecting that. I'm gonna drop in a link into the chat to purchase the issue, which is through GMR Submittable, and you can go ahead and pick a copy up like now.
I'm just gonna jump in. Ben Alsher, do you want to talk about the cover art at all? You were the one who
I had a little hand in it. It was the only thing I had to do with the issue. Usually I'm one of the poetry editors for GMR. And so with this issue, it was really nice to kind of step back and kind of not be a part of that. But then kind of later on in the process, it was sort of like, what are we going to do for the cover art? And so I'm a huge fan of Raven Leilani, and I'm also a NYU student, and she just graduated from there, and I've been following her career and also her visual art career, which is so amazing because that's an aspect of the novel as well. And so I kind of just randomly like DM'd her on Twitter and was like, would you ever let us use one of these things, you know? And she was so helpful and supportive and stuff, and agreed to do it. So it really worked out. I think it works perfectly, and there's like negative space for the design. It kind of it was nice. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that backstory for that beautiful cover. And I love that novel, Lester, and it's really cool to know that she has a visual arts practice that because it so influences there's so much about painting in that novel. Yeah, would anyone have any questions for our readers? I'm wondering what you're reading right now, what you're working on, if you're working on a new poetry collection or working on a current manuscript, or if you're working on a collection of stories or a novel. If each of you wanted to talk about maybe what you're reading and what you're working on, I'd love to hear that. If no one has questions, and you can feel free to drop them in the chat if you'd like for questions. But maybe we should start with Sky. Do you want to just go in the order of in which you read, and we can maybe hear what you're reading and what you're working, if you're working on a project or if you're working on individual pieces.
Okay, that sounds good. Right now, I just finished at my MFA program, so I've spent the last week defending my thesis, and I ended up passing with distinction. So I'm really happy about that after all the stress and nerves and craziness and anxiety. And so that's kind of, I have been just working on the same poems for the past year and trying to get them where I wanted them to be. And now that that's over and I can kind of like clear some space in my mind, I've started to write some new poems. So I'm really happy and excited about that. In terms of what I'm reading right now, I've been reading, I started reading Kink, the new anthology that just came out. I've been reading Daddy by Emma Cline because everyone was talking about that collection of short stories. I've been reading some Claudia Rankine, because I love her work and I feel like it's very similar to what I try to do with my own poetry. And so I admire it so much, and like her investigative poetry and her work. It's just so, I always think like, what if I stopped and, just ask someone why they treated me in this way or why this happened, and so I've been kind of digging into her work as well. But yeah, that's what I've been working on lately.
Thanks, Guy. What about you, Cherene?
Let's see. It's been, like I said, kind of hard to write for me during this period between teaching on Zoom, virtual schooling my kids on Zoom, just all the stuff. But reading is what I've really taken refuge in. So in terms of poetry, I just finished Francine Harris's Here's the Sweet Hand. And I just loved what she was doing with language in that book. And that's been really generative for me, just thinking about writers who write differently than I do. I really appreciate that. And that helps me get out of the box of writing in the same way. I read a lot of fiction, so I have read Lester, so I was really excited to have this the cover. So I'm glad you said something about the cover. Also, so perfect to have a writer who is also a visual artist, do a cover that's associated with BSc. And I went to the Studio Center, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, and had a retreat there, and it's such a beautiful space. So I'm missing that as well, like the ability to get into these spaces where writing can happen. I'm trying to think of the other. Oh, I just finished Lady Hubbard, her second novel. It's called The Rib King. Just finished that like this afternoon. So I'm a fan of Lady's work, and so yeah, those are some of the things that are right now on my list.
I am currently reading The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Disha Filial, and that's really been fun and amazing. I just finished The Roundhouse. I consider myself someone who likes to go back and read things. So things that books and stories that have come out maybe a few years later. I tend to find myself in that category of reader. So that's been really wonderful. And in terms of writing, I am working on a novel and short stories. So a novel that kind of focuses on a young woman and her relationship with her mother, and set in both the Bronx and St. Lucia, and kind of exploring the bridge between Black American and Black Caribbean families, and some of the kind of questions around distant mothers. And so been working on that, and trying to find inspiration wherever I can.
Thanks, Darise. There is a question from Darcy in the chat, and which is posed to all of you. And she was wondering how, if or at all, or in what way maybe your writing has changed over time. And that can definitely speak to, even if you're just getting out of an MFA program, like, you're from beginning an MFA program to the end of, defending your thesis, or to, having published a book, but now working on a second collection, or been working on a longer project, like a novel versus short stories, how has your process changed over time, or has it? And I mean, big disclaimer, of course, like COVID has been a major game changer for all of us. And that might have impacted your process as well. So yeah, anyone want to take that question?
Should I start? Are we still going in the same order?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. It's just been so many ups and downs. And I think that the thing about being in an MFA program is like you're supposed to learn about what your process is going to be, but I mean, of course, no one anticipated a pandemic in the midst of all of this, and so I've just kind of been focused on like surviving and self-care and trying to be gentle with myself, maybe in a way that I hadn't been before. Like I was always like, oh, I have to be writing. I have to be producing something. I need to be writing something all the time, And so now I'm just kind of like, okay, breathe. You're okay. Doesn't always have to be, making something every day, and just trying to be kind to myself. I think that's something that was one of the results of the pandemic that I couldn't have anticipated, is that I kind of became a little more gentle with myself about my productivity in terms of writing.
One way for me, I write in a lot of different genres. So I do some literary criticisms, fiction. The poetry, like I said, under COVID, for some reason, has been harder. So I've been writing a lot of essays, personal essays. And that's new for me because it's a different thing. It's not literary criticism, right? It's not fiction, right? But it's got these elements of both things. And so it's been, I've enjoyed experimenting a little bit outside my comfort zone with the kind of writing that a personal essay demands, especially with the personal. I tend to I like to hide, even in my poetry, behind the speaker and the persona and be a little bit protective. So I feel like there's a discipline for me to think about, how much do I say, about myself, about my family, how many secrets do I spill? And so that's been, I think, in terms of writing process, I've become more comfortable with figuring out a way to tell a different kind of truth, I would say, over time.
Yeah, I think the biggest shifts for me have been kind of reducing my concern with perfection and just getting on the page what needs to get on the page and kind of worrying about the prettiness of it later and being okay with that. And I think the other shift has been really feeling drawn to my ancestors and wanting to research and find them and their names and as much as I can about them and wanting to write about them and their stories, either by creating what I don't know or by using what I do know and just kind of getting it documented. So that's been a different kind of writing that's been kind of expanding my world and my imagination a little bit. Not a little bit, a lot.
Great. I love hearing about the evolution of and how, like, sometimes you switch genres because it's something new and it gets you makes you stretch you in different ways. And I also love how you touched on like research is also working, being a writer also means just reading a lot too. And I think that's where I live. I live, where my home is. My home is reading, and then the writing is the work. So yeah. We're coming up onto our time, but I just didn't know if there was any lingering questions or any last words, Keith, that you might have. Any other highlights from the issue you might want to plug here, or Yeah, and thank you so much for reading those poems and opening up the reading tonight. It was so lovely to hear both your words, Keith, and also Ross's and Lucille's. It was a really beautiful way to enter into this conversation that the people that are in this issue are also in conversation with all of these other writers that have come before and are currently still, like, you know, Ross Gay, a living legend, and human and poet in the world. And then including your poem too as well, was also really, really lovely. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I have anything in particular to close out with. I'll say that one of the things that I think is really important, and I keep trying to remind myself as like as an editor or as a teacher, is how my gut reaction a lot of times is to speak about things when they happen, and that's like partially like informed by gender and upbringing and all kinds of different things, right? Like not everyone is inclined or able to speak out when something happens. And for me, one of the things that's been important is to remember that sometimes I have the opportunity to like step back, to like to like use a position that I have in order to like hopefully let someone else speak. And so that's like the most important thing in my opinion about being an editor in general, is that like it's an opportunity, first and foremost to me, to like let people read work that is written and is good and like just needs a space in which it can be read or experienced. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity and to share all of this great work. The cover, as we mentioned, is beautiful. A whole lot of work goes into this, and I'm not talking about myself at all. I'm talking about like just like all kinds of things happen even outside of like the selection of the poetry, and goes into the selection of the poetry. Tara did a ton of work. So yeah, just thank everyone for all the time that they put into this, and I'm very heartened by and inspired by the writing in this issue, and I'm really glad that that I can hand it to people now, that I can like take the book out and be like, check this out, this is amazing work. So yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks to our readers for being here. I wanted to invite everyone to unmute and give everyone a round of applause, because we're always muted normally in a Zoom room, but I wanted to like actually give a round of applause.